Before we begin this video, I want to give a huge shout out to Russell and Elisa from Grassroots #YangGang. They were so kind enough to provide us this footage for you all. Make sure you go check out their channel. I highly recommend them. They're working hard every single day. They moved their family up to New Hampshire just to campaign for Andrew Yang. They're talking to voters, they're talking to the news media, they're going to rallies, they're going to town halls, they're going to events, they're canvassing, they're uploading videos every single day. Make sure you check them out. I put the links to their Twitter and YouTube in the description below. And with that, we begin the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States.
Let's go, Andrew! Hello, Manchester. How are we doing? Heck yeah! I almost had that drink out of her hand, man. That was on it. Andrew, love you, man. Love you too. Yes, and whoever chose this venue is an ace because I love these arcades. What would my game be out of these?
Street Fighter.
Don't judge me, but I would. Wait, this is a Street Fighter game? All right, so out of the games I could see, I was going to choose Miss Pac-Man. But now that I know there's a Street Fighter game in the back, I literally spent my teenage years here in New Hampshire playing Street Fighter 2.
Yeah.
So it's like a trip backwards in time. How many of you know I graduated from high school here in New Hampshire? I went to Phillips Exeter Academy, graduated in 1992. They had me back to speak a few months ago. When I was honest, I said I didn't have a good time here, so I haven't been back since I graduated. And then the entire student body erupted in applause, and I was like, whoa, I guess some things haven't changed that much. It wasn't the reaction I was going for. So I grew up in upstate New York, went to high school right here in New Hampshire, played a lot of Street Fighter 2, and then I went to Brown University, studied economics and political science, went to law school, became an unhappy corporate lawyer for 5 months, and then I left to start a business. So how many of you have started a business or organization or mailing list or club? Go ahead and raise your hand. So if you have your hand up, you know how super hard it is, and how whenever anyone asks you how it's going, what do you say? Great. Going great. My business went great until it failed. My parents told their friends I was still a lawyer. But I've been bitten by the bug. I went to work at another company, then another, and then I became the head of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States and was bought by a bigger company in 2009. Now 2009 was a very, very tough time in the country. How many of you were here in New Hampshire in 2009?
Yeah.
And how was it here in this part of New Hampshire? It sucked. It sucked in a lot of the country. The financial crisis tipped the whole country into recession. And I thought I had a hunch as to why it had happened. It was because all of the wannabe whiz kids I'd gone to Exeter and Brown and Columbia with had gone to Wall Street and created derivatives and exotic financial instruments that had helped crash the economy. And so I said, that's a train wreck. What can we do to improve on that? And so I thought, well, ideally, our young people would be creating new businesses and creating jobs in places like Detroit and Cleveland and Baltimore and New Orleans and Birmingham and Providence, Rhode Island. So I quit my job. I donated some money to start a new organization that would help train entrepreneurs called Venture for America. I started calling rich friends with this question: do you love America? Then the smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes to that question, Andrew? And I said, at least $10,000. And then 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. It's like, I thought you did. So we started with a couple $100,000, then it grew to the millions, helped create several thousand jobs around the country, got honored by the Obama administration a couple times, got to bring my wife to meet the president. So my in-laws were excited about me for about a week. But during this time, while I was getting these accolades and awards, I had this sinking feeling because I was seeing so much of the country that felt like it had fallen into a deep well of despair. So I grew up in upstate New York and then New Hampshire and New England. How many of you grew up here in New England?
Where? Upstate New York.
Upstate New York!
Schenectady, New York.
Yes.
How about the Midwest? South. West Coast.
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, that counts. Yeah, I'll be back there in a minute. Because right after you vote New Hampshire, Nevada votes. I was blown away by the disparities between different parts of this country, where if you fly between Michigan and New York, or St. Louis and San Francisco, you feel like you're crossing dimensions and decades and ways of life and not just a few time zones. But I was still surprised when Donald Trump won in 2016. How did you all react when Donald Trump won? Devastated, cried, disbelief. There are some people here that were probably happy about it, and everyone here has family members and friends and neighbors that were happy about it. To me, this was like a full stop. This said, wait a minute, tens of millions of our fellow Americans decided to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star. Things must have gotten pretty bleak for them to take that bet. And if you turned on cable news today, why would you think that Donald Trump is our president today? If you turn on cable news, you get this cocktail of answers that sound something like this. Russia, racism, Facebook, Hillary Clinton, emails, the FBI, all mixed together. But I'm a numbers guy, and the numbers tell a clear and different story. The reason Donald Trump is our president today is because we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, and tens of thousands here in New Hampshire, though that happened a little bit earlier. So if that list of Midwestern states sounds familiar to you, those are the states that Donald Trump needed to win, and did win. Next week, I'm going to Ohio for the 4th Democratic debate, and Ohio lost... I'll gossip with you guys. You know what happens during commercial breaks of the debate? We get our makeup redone. But we also make small talk with the other candidates. So I have like moments with Joe Biden and moments with Kamala and all this stuff. Like, I can't believe, oh my gosh, like I have to give Bernie a hug when I see him next week. Let's all give Bernie a hug right now. So Ohio used to be a bellwether swing state. It went to Donald Trump by 8 points. Why is that? Because they lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. And the data clearly shows when you lose your jobs, blue goes to red. That is why Trump won those states. And what happened in those manufacturing communities is now spreading to other parts of the economy. How many of you noticed stores closing around where you live here in New Hampshire? And why are those stores closing?
Amazon.
Amazon, that's right. Amazon's sucking up $20 billion in business every single year. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year?
Zero.
Zero. That is your math, Manchester. 20 billion out, zero back. Most common job in most of the country is working as a retail worker. 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. So if 30% of stores and malls close, what will that worker do? What is her next move? How many of you have seen self-serve kiosks in a McDonald's or other fast food restaurant? Food service and food preparation, third most common job type in the United States, and McDonald's say that self-serve kiosks will be in every location in the country in 2 years. It started at the front of the house, but they're going to move it to the back of the house too. When you all call a customer service line of a big company, I'm sure you do the exact same thing I do. You pound 000 human until you get a person on the line, right? Raise your hand if that's what you do. Oh yeah, we all do it. And then we breathe a sigh of relief when the person picks up. In 2 or 3 years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be fast, seamless, delightful, a little bit sexy. What is this going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work at call centers right now making $14 an hour?
Retrain to be coders.
Retrain to be coders, that's right. That's the kind of bullshit suggestion I'm talking. No, but we know he's just... One of the most important ones, how many of you all know a truck driver here in New Hampshire? Driving a truck is the most common job in 29 states. There are 3.5 million truckers in this country. 94% men, average age 49, average education high school or 1 year of college. And my friends in California are working on trucks that can drive themselves. Robot trucks are on our highways right now in Arizona, and UPS just invested. Why are so many engineers trying to make trucks drive themselves? For the money. $168 billion a year in cost savings if they can automate away truck driving. $168 billion a year. I mean, that's enough so that if you're a reasonable investor and I come to you with any technology that can move the needle, you're like, take my money if you can make any progress. And my friends in California tell me they are 98% of the way there.
Wow.
Now, 98% sounds impressive, but 2% is a very high error rate when you're talking about semi-trucks. You can't just have trucks smashing into things and being like, well, we got a 98%, right? And the robot trucks are really bad with something called snow. That's why they're testing them in Arizona. That's true. Everything's true. So the question is, how do they think they can get the last 2%? Do you all remember the first time you watched TV on your phone? You remember that? You were like, wow, we can do that now? That's 3G. We are now rolling out 5G. The way the tech companies think they can get the last 2% of robot trucks is by equipping the trucks with teleoperating software so that when the truck's not sure what to do because of bad weather, it will then beep and alert a teleoperator in Nevada or Arizona who will then beam into the truck and drive it like a video game. Is there a driving game here? So imagine the truck has cameras on the front, they beam in, they drive it like a video game, and then the computer says, okay, I've got it again, you can beam back out. What do you think the ratio will be between these teleoperators in Nevada and Arizona and the 3.5 million truckers? 1,000 to 1, 10 to 1, 100 to 1? It's certainly not going to be 1 to 1. You know that's not going to be the case. What is that going to mean for the truckers or the 7 million Americans who work in truck stops, hotels, diners, and retail establishments that rely on the truckers getting out and having a meal or going to sleep? We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, what experts are calling the Fourth Industrial Revolution. When is the last time you heard a politician say Fourth Industrial Revolution?
Right now.
Just now. And I'm barely a politician.
Which is good.
Oh, I'm glad you like it. One reason I love New Hampshire. Donald Trump is not the cause of all of our problems. He's a symptom. He's a manifestation. We are tearing out the most common jobs in our economy, and now people are so desperate they turn to Donald Trump. We have to get down into the roots and solve the problems that got him elected in the first place. So I took these problems, I wrote a book, which you can take a free copy of because we're in the magical land of New Hampshire. And you all are worth your weight in gold. How many Californians is each New Hampshire voter worth?
1,000.
1,000, that's right. So how many of you are here tonight? Let's call it, what's the fire code in here?
99.
99! You see 99 New Hampshire voters, I see 99,000 Californians. That's like 2.5 football stadiums. You all are among the most powerful people in our country. You're a little spoiled. You're like, I don't know what to think of that Yang guy, I only saw him the one time. How many, like, raise your hand and tell us how many presidential candidates you've seen in this cycle. So this would be 4, be 10 if you want, like, go ahead, raise your hand. 4, 5, you can do 2 hands if you went past 2. 1, 2, 7. Yeah, because the candidates know how powerful you are. They know you're each worth 1,000 voters. They know if you take a vision to the rest of the country, it then will spread like wildfire very, very quickly. This is the power you have. Now, how are you going to use that power? What vision will you take to the rest of the country? I'm pretty sure the first time you heard about me and my campaign, it went something like this. There's an Asian man running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Yeah. Nothing like the first time, right? And the first time you heard it, it sounded like a gimmick. It sounded like it was yeah, where's the money going to come from? Too good to be true, never going to happen. But this is not my idea. This is a deeply American idea that's in our DNA. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, called it the Citizens' Dividend. Martin Luther King fought for it in the 60s, called it the guaranteed minimum income for all Americans, and it is what he was fighting for when he was assassinated in 1968. 1,000 economists endorsed it. It was so mainstream that it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. It's called the Family Assistance Plan. And then 11 years later, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that, Manchester? And how do they pay for it?
Marijuana.
And what is the oil of the 21st century?
Technology.
Technology, AI, self-driving cars and trucks, big data. How many of you saw this study that came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil? Raise your hand on that. Keep your hand up if you've got your data check in the mail. What happened to the data check? Did it get lost? It did not get lost. It went to Amazon, it went to Facebook, it went to Google, and we never saw a dime. This $168 billion are going to save by automating truck driving. How much of that are we going to see?
Zero.
Next to zero, because you have a $1 trillion tech company like Amazon paying zero in taxes. Now I'm going to ask you all, whose fault is it that they're paying zero in taxes? Is it their fault?
It's our fault.
No, it's their job to pay as little in taxes as possible. You can imagine the scene every year. The accountants, the CFO, will meet up with Jeff Bezos in his office and say, hey, great news, Jeff, zero in taxes again. And then what does Jeff do? Jeff goes to his vault, takes out bags of gold coins, gives them to each person. They take the bags of gold coins, they drive them home, and then they take gold coin baths like Scrooge McDuck in the old cartoons. That is their job. It is our job to make sure they can't do that. Am I right, Manchester? It is your job. This is the power you have. You have the power to give the American people a tiny slice, a tiny sliver, our fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. If you get a slice of that $168 billion a year, we can easily afford $1,000 a month for every American adult. Particularly because after this money comes into your hands, how would you spend it? And I want you to imagine, after I'm president, thank you, New Hampshire.
Yeah!
How would you actually spend an extra $1,000 a month? Student loans, video games, I like him, this establishment likes him. Mortgage, rent, go back to school, car repairs, start a business, I like that. Daycare expenses, Little League signups. How much of that money would stay right here in New Hampshire? Most all of it. A little bit of it would float up to the cloud. You would update your Netflix subscription or upgrade it. But most of it would stay right here and it would circulate through your economy over and over again. This is the trickle-up economy. From our people, our families, and our communities up. And this is the vision we have to take to the rest of the country as soon as possible. We have to go even deeper. How many of you were excited about GDP when you woke up this morning? You're like, I'm going to make a big contribution today. It's going to be that kind of day. Of course not. It's ridiculous. And I talk about my wife who's at home with our two boys, one of whom is autistic. How much is her work included in GDP every day?
Zero.
Zero. We know that's nonsense. We know that's perverse. That her work is among the most challenging and vital work that's done in our society today.
Amen.
GDP. Yeah, like I thank God for Evelyn. I text her and was like, "Thank you, baby." Yeah, I tell people I have two jobs: advance our country and stay married. And so far, I'm 2 for 2. So GDP is at record highs in America today. Also at record highs, stress, anxiety, financial insecurity, student loan debt, even drug overdoses and suicides. It has gotten so bad that America's life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row. Do you know the last time American life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918. Global pandemic that killed millions. You have to go back over 100 years to find a time when American life expectancy declined 3 years in a row. But we are there now because suicides and drug overdoses have each overtaken vehicle deaths as cause of death in this country. You don't hear much of that on the news. So if GDP is obscuring these problems, what would actually tell us how we're doing? What, if it got better here in Manchester, would actually make you happy in a genuine way?
Education.
Childhood success rates in education.
Clean water.
Clean air and clean water. If that got better, you'd be pretty happy about it, right?
Small business.
Yeah. Small business formation and start rates.
Healthcare.
Health and life expectancy. How about mental health and freedom from substance abuse?
Yeah.
If these things, literally when you talk about what would make us happy, you could actually just take happiness and be like, hey, how's our happiness doing? That's a thing. If we had these kind of measurements, we would see the nature of our problems, but also see how we can improve on them. Raise your hand if you run a business or organization or a club. Imagine if you had the wrong measurements for that organization. How's that organization going to do over time? Pretty terribly. Robot trucks will be tremendous for GDP. Be terrible for Americans. And right now, if we keep worshiping GDP, it's going to take us off a cliff. Even the inventor of GDP said this is a terrible measurement for national well-being, and we should never use it as that. And that was 100 years ago. Here we are 100 years later following it off a cliff. Aside from GDP, what are the other two measurements they always beat us up with in the press? Say this is what's going on. Headline unemployment rate. What else? Stock market prices. You remember Donald Trump in 2016 when he said unemployment rate, fake news, millions of Americans out of the workforce, and then he becomes president and he's like, oh, it's real now. Oh, think about this. He was right the first time. The headline unemployment rate is more or less garbage or malpractice. It hides the fact that the labor force participation rate is down to 63%, a multi-decade low, the same levels as Costa Rica and El Salvador. It obscures the fact that 94% of new jobs are temp gig or contract jobs that don't have benefits. It obscures the fact that 40 to 44% of recent college graduates are underemployed doing a job that doesn't require a college degree. The headline unemployment rate even improves and gets better when you drop out of the workforce. So this number, Trump was right the first time, and then the third number, stock market prices, the top 20% of Americans own 92% of the stock market. So you're essentially cheerleading what happens to the top 20% of Americans. The bottom 50% own 0. The bottom 80% own 8%. So I'd ask you again, does that measurement make sense if you're trying to figure out how we're doing? So we have these three headline measurements that they keep beating us up with in the press and saying it's great, it's great, it's great. It's not great. We all know that. When Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, he said he was going to make America great again. And what did Hillary Clinton say in response?
It's already great.
America's already great. Now, I voted for Hillary after I supported Bernie and then blah, 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 But she was not on base when she said America's already great. That was not the right response. We have to acknowledge the depth and severity of the problems and the rot and the disintegration. And then we have to go down and try and strengthen our communities, ourselves, make us more whole. So what I'm going to do as president is I'm going to go down the street and say, hey, GDP, 100 years old, totally out of date, super useless. I'm going to modernize it to the American scorecard that includes how our kids are doing, our mental health, our environmental sustainability, and then I'll report to all of you how we're doing by those measurements, the real measurements, every year at the State of the Union. I'll be the first president to use a PowerPoint deck in the State of the Union. I want to talk a little bit about climate change just for a sec. How many of you think climate change is a major problem, existential threat? Yeah, me too. So having economic measurements tied to it, very helpful. How many of you saw the Democratic debate in Detroit when I staked out the new third position on climate change? Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. The rest of you, it's cool, because the debates are not that much fun to watch. It's cool. So, I'm going to be in the next two, so if you want to tune in.
Let's go!
I think I'm going to get a fair shake this time because Anderson Cooper and Aaron Burnett have both interviewed me. I think I've got a reform.
Yeah!
I got to say, the moderator matters a great deal. It's kind of wild. Going into it, I was like, oh, I'm sure this will be fairly even-handed. But now it's all getting better because it also gets better because the stage is going to shrink. And you know who's still here? This guy.
Yeah!
So we have to take this vision of an economy that works for us to the rest of the country. And you all have that power. You can spread it like wildfire. I stand before you right now. I was 4th in a recent national poll. And I gotta say, going from anonymous to 4th is probably a lot harder than going from 4th to 1st. And 4th to 1st happens all the time. And the number one criteria that Democrats have for the nominee is what? What's the number one criteria? Who can beat Donald Trump? Don't take their word for it. I am one of only 2 candidates that 10% or more of Donald Trump voters said they will support in the general.
Yeah, you are.
That means if I'm the nominee, we win the whole thing in 2020.
Let's go, Andrew!
And this is in large part because this campaign is attracting not just Democrats and progressives, but it's attracting independents, libertarians, people who voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's give them a round of applause because they're having a
We in the Yang Gang now.
We can build a much broader coalition than any of the other candidates in the field. Now, Donald Trump's our president because he got some of the problems right, but his solutions were the opposite of what we need. What were his solutions? We're going to build a wall, we're going to turn the clock backwards, we're going to bring the old jobs back. We have to do the opposite of all these things, Manchester. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society as quickly as possible. We have to evolve in how we see ourselves and work and value. And I am the ideal candidate for that job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. Thank you, Manchester. Make America think harder. And it's up to you. It's up to you to tell the rest of the country it's not left, it's not right, it's forward. That is where we're going to go together. Thank you all so much. And now, because there are only 99 of us in this arcade, I would love to take some questions. So, go ahead and raise your hand if you've got questions for me. Hey.
How do you keep companies from moving out of the United States if you are taxing them for the freedom dividend?
So this is not going to be an issue because other countries are ahead of us in figuring out how to have companies like Amazon not pay zero in taxes. So my plan is using a mechanism that's already been adopted in most other developed economies. There are two reasons why Amazon can't be like, oh, like, you know, we got to get out of the US because they're taxing us. Number one, I'm taxing them when they sell to us, and we are still the biggest market in the world, so you can't abandon that. Like, you're not going to not sell to someone because you have to pay a little toll. And number two, the mechanism I'm suggesting is already in place in these other countries, so if you go there, like, it's already there waiting for you. In a way, we just have to play catch up. It is embarrassing how behind we are in terms of taxing these companies because these sophisticated tech companies, they just move it all through Ireland. They say no profits to see here. They pay their executives in stock options and stock compensation that they can then take as an expense. So this mechanism, I'm happy to say, will not cause anyone to leave because we're still the richest, most advanced economy in the world. They need to sell to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here you go.
I think you have one of the greatest narratives connecting the economic issues and especially anxiety, depression, suicide rate, and overdose rate, and appreciate that about you and your campaign. And I'm an opioid addict in recovery, now a small business owner living here in Manchester.
Let's give this man a round.
Can you speak more specifically to the different measures you take to help address the overdose crisis?
Y'all donate if you can.
Thank you for sharing, brother. That's awesome. It makes me so angry what's happened in this country because the opioid epidemic was a disease of capitalism run amok, where the federal government turned a blind eye while Purdue Pharma dispensed millions of OxyContin prescriptions and said this is a non-addictive wonder drug. And millions of Americans got hooked because it turns out it's super addictive. There were more OxyContin prescriptions than human beings in the state of Ohio at one point. Think about that. If you're a functional government, how can you say that's appropriate? How can you look up and be like, oh yeah, that's about right? The government eventually fined that company $600 million, which sounds like a lot until you realize they made $30 billion. They got a 2% fine, and they killed thousands of Americans. So if the government turned a blind eye while this was going on, then it's up to the government to do everything in its power to try and make us whole, which is impossible, because lives have been destroyed, families have been destroyed, you can't come back from that. But you have to at least give people a fighting chance, give communities a fighting chance, and one big step we should take, based on what's happened in other countries, we should decriminalize opiates for personal use. If you're struggling with addiction, we need to get you to treatment and not a prison cell.
Yes.
We need safe consumption sites and safe injection sites so that if you, I was with an EMT here in New Hampshire, and he told me he saved someone who's ODing, that then he has to go back and save them again the next week, and the next week, because they send that person home. And he's like, it makes no sense. We should send them to a safe injection site or a safe consumption site so that someone can actually monitor them and not out there trying to save their life 7 days later. Imagine that EMT and having to do that as a job, being like, this system makes no sense. It's because what we've done in this country is we've personalized failure and socialized only corporate responsibility. It's like the banks falter, we bail them out. The person struggling with addiction, it's your fault. Like, you know, we have to make it a level playing field, where in this case, if it was the company's actions and profits and the government's negligence, then we have to say, look, we have to hold our people to the same standard that we are these companies. Right, that's so... Yeah, sir.
One thing I've noticed that's getting worse is the spread of misinformation, especially by Fox News, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity. Ronald Reagan repealed the Fairness Doctrine, which kept news organizations from presenting the facts, and now they're just people pushing propaganda. I haven't heard anyone take a position on what they can do to bring the Fairness Doctrine back and try to keep this spread of misinformation from being pushed out by major news organizations.
Thank you for the question. It's really perceptive. I've got a multi-part plan on journalism because I think this is fundamental. If you believe in democracy, you have to believe in local journalism in particular. Because how can you vote on what's going on in your town if you have no idea? And studies have shown that it's like the case. If you don't have a local paper, then everyone votes along party lines, and the government's just like, well, no one knows what we're doing, so we're just going to do what we want. So you need a local paper, but over 1,200 newspapers have gone out of business over the last number of years because they used to rely upon classified ads that now just all migrated to Craigslist, and subscription revenue is not going to cut it. So if you want local democracy to function, then you need to say, look, we think a local publication, and when I say publication, it can mean a website, it can mean something operating in a library. I don't mean like newspapers. I'm not like someone who's like, I mean, I love newspapers, but I'm not like, it's not the medium, it's the content. So we need to have new ways of supporting local journalism. We have to have some counterbalance to the market incentives because, to your point, the fact is sensationalistic content gets more clicks. And so you wind up with all these financial incentives to create clickbait and like headlines that are pushing the envelope and then go over the envelope and then go into misinformation. So the goal is to try and recreate many elements of the Fairness Doctrine to say, look, if you're purposefully misinforming the American people, then there has to be some kind of accountability for that. And it's not journalism. And then there has to be some way of saying, like, look, this content is not news, this content is entertainment or editorial.
Yeah. Right.
That's a fundamental problem. The information silos and the misinformation, and this is before deepfakes started hitting the web, where they can show videos of us doing whatever the heck and they're indistinguishable from real videos. I mean, we have very, very big steps to take. Yeah.
As a student entering college next fall, I'm just wondering what your plan is for dealing with like student loans and for college.
Why has college gotten 2.5 times more expensive than when I went? Has it gotten 2.5 times better? Are you going to step into some paradise when you show up in the fall? So there are two main reasons it's gotten so expensive. Number one, states have cut back in the financial support. So that's not good. The second, though, the bigger problem is that they've become very, very bloated in terms of bureaucracies and administrators. Now, I'm for forgiving a lot of the student loan debt. But I don't think free college is the answer to everything because only 33% of Americans attend college. And so we have to try and help 100% of Americans. So for someone like you who's entering college, I want to get the cost of college down by saying to schools, look, your costs have to be tied to the number of students, and if you're hiring administrators right and left, then we have to actually create incentive for you to, or a penalty for you to get that down. For you, you get $1,000 a month from the Freedom Dividend, so that's going to help pay for school. And then, for people who aren't going to go to college, I want to invest massive resources in technical vocational apprenticeship training to try and create paths forward that aren't 4-year degrees. Right now, only 6% of American high school students are in technical or vocational apprenticeship. You know what that percentage is in Germany? 59%. Think of that gulf. 6%, 59%. And when you talk about jobs that are going to be here for a long time, they include a lot of these kinds of technical jobs. Can you imagine what it would take to make a robot plumber? It's actually impossible. You really need a human plumber. And there are a lot of those jobs that will be here for a long time. They're high paying, high satisfaction levels. So we need to create diverse opportunities for people both going to college and not. Where are you going to school?
No, I mean next year. I'm still a senior.
Are you still a senior? Yeah. So you're applying?
Yep.
I think you're going to do all your apps, man. Also, what business do you run now?
Communication.
All right, man. Give a plug for a business. Let's see.
Really? Why, thank you. So, if you ever need to communicate to non-traditional constituencies about a new message, I've got the communications firm for you. Vagabond.
Vagabond, I love it. That's a great name, man. You did a great job with branding your own firm, that's for sure.
Andrew.
Vagabond.
Can I piggyback off that with education?
Of course you can. Who's that? Here you go.
So my question to you is this. So as an educator for over 15 years, I am one of the educators who has multiple degrees, cannot support myself with my salary, have to work multiple jobs. That is all over the United States. What can you do for us? I mean, we are not supported. We are told that we're not respected. Our job is one of the most important jobs in the United States. I mean, I actually teach special education. I am an autism specialist. I've had to move several jobs. It's crazy, and it's not fair. It's not okay. And now we have Betsy DeVos, who is really like destroying education. What are you going to do for us?
Well, first I have appoint an education secretary that believes in public schools. That's like, but the data shows that teachers are worth their weight in gold in terms of educational outcomes, so we should give teachers a raise to pay them somewhere closer to what they're worth. Really, like, it's not a cost, it's an investment. Like, a good teacher, over the course of their kids, actually is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I have a son who's autistic, and so I particularly appreciate the work you do. I mean, a lot of it's probably one-on-one, but the difference you can make in a kid's life and trajectory, I mean, if you were to put a dollar value on it, though it's more important than human value, but if you were to put a dollar value on it, it would be immense.
I got rid.
Part of this is measuring our economy so that you're not a cost, that everything you do is an investment. So if you were tying our economic progress to childhood success rates, and all of a sudden every teacher is getting measured as like a massive generator of human capital, which is what you are. Short term, though, we seem to pay teachers more, and that's not a feel-good thing, that's just what the data says. The other big component of this is that 2/3 of our kids' educational outcomes are determined by non-school factors. And educators know this. How many of y'all are teachers? It's not just her. Let's give all the teachers here a round of applause. All teachers. I'm willing to bet that all teachers know that their work in the classroom accounts for not the entire kid's performance. The data shows that 2/3 of the kid's performance is happening outside of school. That's parental time, number of words read to the kid when they're young, stress levels in the house, type of neighborhood. These are variables that account for 2/3 of the kid's academic performance. We're asking our teachers to be miracle workers, where we say, educate our kids, you're 100% responsible, but you can only control 1/3 of it, and a significant number of the kids that are showing up to your classroom are actually totally not ready to learn. But you'll make magic. It's unfair to teachers, it's unfair to the kids. So what we need to do is we need to get resources into the homes and families. We have to get to the other 65% of that kid's learning potential. And the way to do that is to get resources to the family so that one of the parents or both of them can spend more time with the child, the stress levels go down, the house then is filled with a better learning environment. There's a trait called conscientiousness in kids that's one of the most positive correlations to adult success. If you're conscientious, then you're going to do well. And households that are well structured reward conscientiousness. Households that are chaotic, where even if you do something right, it doesn't matter, destroy conscientiousness. So we have to get resources into the homes and families so the kids have a real chance to learn, and then our teachers can have a better chance to teach. The man with a baby. I love a man with a baby.
So me and my family finally made it to the middle class somehow, and I can't afford health care. What can you do?
How old is your beautiful boy?
He's 3.
He's beautiful! Yay! Oh, look at that. He likes video games. Just like mine. Healthcare is breaking the backs of families around the country, #1 source of bankruptcy. And as usual, it's a system that revolves around the almighty dollar. Right now, the incentives are to generate revenue at our expense and not necessarily to make us healthier. You notice how healthcare costs and drug costs only go in one direction, up? What kind of business model is that? Where they literally just be like, hey, how are we going to make more money next year? Just like raise the prices. And then we just keep on hitting up and up and up. We're at 18% of GDP. We spend twice as much as other developed countries for worse results. Who's making out? The drug companies, the device companies, the private insurance companies. Who's suffering? Dads, like, what's your name? Ben. Dads like Ben and this little boy who are like, how the heck do we pay for health care? We have to get health care off the backs of our families and businesses. So I'm for Medicare for all, a public health care plan that would provide affordable health care to every American, independent of work.
Yeah.
And the big confusion around this is somehow, again, we don't have the money for it. We're spending twice as much as other countries. There is so much waste in the system. If we have a government that actually can negotiate lower prices and higher access on behalf of tens of millions of Americans, you can get reasonable health care just like that. Other countries have done it, we can too. There's nothing stopping us. You know what's stopping us? Popular will. If enough of us get together and make this case to the American people, then Ben and his son and his wife won't have to worry about this anymore. You shouldn't have to worry about this, man. You should just be enjoying playing with your kid instead of being stressed out about healthcare costs.
Thank you.
I like to go man, woman, or male, female. So I'm looking for, he's like, that's not me. One of the ladies, you have a question? I can sense you're thinking about it.
Yes.
Here you go.
How do you plan to help those that are marginalized, like LGBTQ communities and race and our ethnicities, Asian and Latino, people that are usually looked down upon, and especially now under Trump. So how are you going to fix that?
I talked before about being the opposite of Donald Trump. I think I'm the opposite of Donald Trump in this regard too. Because what's happening in the rest of the world is they're looking at America and being like, what the heck happened to America?
Yeah.
And imagine after I become president, the rest of the world will be like, wow, they turned that around in a hurry. Can you imagine President Yang come the other way? And then people who are from different backgrounds in this country would be like, wow, it turns out there's no limit to what you can do, even as a child of immigrants in this country. Marginalized groups like women, blacks, Latinos, have lower access to capital and resources, and $1,000 a month would go further for each of those groups. Particularly for women who we all know do the vast majority of the unrecognized, uncompensated work in our society. $1,000 a month would be a game changer for marginalized groups in particular. For LGBTQ Americans, when I talk to members of that community, and I have many of them on my senior team, they tell me that they're more likely to get kicked out of the house, more likely to get fired from a job, more likely to face economic pressures and stresses and mental illness, and that $1,000 a month would be huge for them to be able to move away from hostile and even dangerous environments towards more welcoming and supportive environments. This is one of the big things we can do to help marginalized people immediately. There are a couple of ways to approach it. One is culture, and then the other is resources, and I think we have to move towards both. I'm actually as mindful of the resources, because the fact is we had an African-American president for 8 years. I worked with him. I voted for him twice. Did he end racism in this country?
No.
No. So we have to stop pretending that a symbol will somehow erase what's in people's minds, hearts, souls, and instead actually, again, go a level deeper. Why are so many Americans right now struggling and even turning on each other? It's in large part because 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost half of us can't afford an unexpected $400 or $500 bill. And the studies show that if you can't pay your bills, you have your head down, you're focused day to day and month to month, and it reduces your mental bandwidth by 13 IQ points or 1 standard deviation. The same studies show that if you have this mindset of scarcity, you're more subject to bad ideas, bad leadership, more hostile, your decision-making erodes. This is what's happening to our country right now. We have this boot on our throats, and it's turning us against each other. If we get the boot off of our throats, then people will have a more open, generous, optimistic, and less alienating view towards each other. This, to me, is a big way we can help marginalized groups, is focus on the resources. It's not that the culture drives resources, the resources drives the culture. Am I right, Manchester? But the resources cannot change unless we change it. That is what my campaign is about. That is what got me into the race. I saw that America is scapegoating immigrants for things that immigrants have very little to do with or nothing to do with. It's a whole other picture. We have to take that picture to the rest of America and show it to them. They will see it and they will recognize it as the truth. This is a very smart country where when shown the truth, we recognize it immediately. But we need your help to show them the picture.
That's right.
There you go, sir.
Thank you. Great to be here, enjoying what you're saying. You gave us a thing I wouldn't like to see happen. My question for you is, all these wonderful ideas and plans, how are they going to get through powerful lobbies in Congress who are going to fight a lot of these ideas with everything they have?
I love this question so much.
And I want to thank my son Zach for telling me to bring him here.
Nice work, Zach. You can vote for my re-election, maybe. Right now, most Americans look up and they have given up on our government because they look up and they see these pipes clogged with money, millions of dollars, just plugging it up, all the corporate lobbying money. They're generally right that it's going to be almost impossible to flush those pipes out. And it's going to take people like you to flush those pipes out. This is one of the only places in the country where democracy actually works the way it's intended, where your vote is powerful and matters. Now the question is, after I get into the White House, I want you all to imagine this picture. It's going to be so glorious. I can see it clear as day because it's going to happen. Check it out.
Let's go!
Here are the steps. It's so fun. All right. So Iowa, we outperform expectations. And essentially anything I do is going to outperform expectations because people are still like, it's like, oh. So I go in there and I beat like a couple of credible candidates and be like, oh, Iowa was okay. I come here to New Hampshire and we shock the world. Because New Hampshire is an open primary. Anyone can vote in the Democratic primary. So if you are a Republican, who are you going to participate in? Donald Trump stopping William Weld? Or the Democratic race, which is much more interesting? You're going to come over, you vote for Andrew Yang. Every poll is underestimating our support because the polls are just talking to registered Democrats. How many of you all are not registered Democrats? That's what I'm talking about. If you guys vote, they don't see you coming. This whole thing,
That's a beautiful thing.
So then we shock the world in New Hampshire. The world is like, what just happened? Andrew Yang just did what in New Hampshire? And then we go to Nevada, where we're very strong, and then South Carolina, and then Super Tuesday, I get swept into the White House. Now this is your question. This question's like, how the heck do you get it done? I want you to imagine the Democratic Party. After we beat Donald Trump, they say we took a chance on Andrew Yang because of New Hampshire. We took a chance on Andrew Yang, but he won, and now we're excited to work with the new Democratic president. And then my flagship proposal is the freedom dividend. Everyone knows I'm going to have won on the freedom dividend. And then the Republicans in Congress are going to look up and say, wait a minute, am I against the dividend? Alaska is a deep red Republican state. It was passed by a Republican governor. I like the dividend. What conservatives really don't like is bureaucracies making everyone's decisions for them. They like economic freedom and independence and autonomy on the part of people. And we don't need all of the Republicans to get on board. We just need a majority to pass that bill, get checks into people's hands, and then everything changes. Then everyone in the country is like, holy shit, the country did something right. I really like this. This is a very unfamiliar feeling. And one of the reasons why I'm bringing people in from other parties is they can tell I'm non-ideological, I'm not particularly partisan, I just want to solve the problems. I'm going to bring in a whole lot of problem solvers from all over the country to help solve these problems, and the Republicans will see it's like I can actually work with him on things like infrastructure, on things that we can agree on, and then start getting some of these problems solved. I am the change agent we need, and we've done this. We raised $10 million last quarter, zero corporate tax. The lobbyists know that I have nothing to do with them. I want nothing to do with them. I represent the American people, and that's how we're going to reduce their influence and get them out of there. My second flagship proposal on the lobbying side is give every American adult 100 democracy dollars that only you can use, and then we wash out the lobbyist money by a factor of 8 to 1. Nice. Because the fact is, all the Democratic proposals, it's like trying to say, look, you can't contribute this, you can't contribute that. It's not going to work. It's like life in Jurassic Park. Remember that? It's like life finds a way. That's like corporate money in America. Corporate money will find its way back in. The only way we can beat it is to flush it out with a wave of people-powered money. And that's exactly what's fueling my campaign, and I can't thank you enough for it. Woo! Yeah! 99% of that $10 million was small dollar donations, average donation only $30. So my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. Yeah!
Almost as cheap, man.
But yeah, we can get it done. Yes.
Zach,
this.
call him for 2 more.
And then we'll come to you, sir.
Thank you, Andrew. So my question is, I'm not worried about Trump voters that are going to vote for Trump. I'm not worried about Democrats that are going to vote for a Democrat. What I'm worried about is disaffected voters. What are you going to do to attract disaffected voters? People like my daughter's boyfriend who says, I'm not going to vote. I don't care anymore. They all disgust me. What are you going to do to get those people on board?
How many of you, this is the first political event you've ever attended? There's always a handful at one of our events if you look around. We're attracting many thousands of the 25% of Americans who are like your, was it son?
No, boyfriend. Daughter's boyfriend.
Go up, daughter's boyfriend. Because a lot of them have checked out, but they're checking back in for this campaign. Because I'm speaking a different language that they feel like is speaking to them, and I'm proposing real solutions that, after we get them across the finish line, will make a big difference. This is actually one of the things that also is driving my campaign, because I'm new to politics, and a lot of people that are joining the campaign are also new to politics. I can solve that problem, not entirely, because no one can do that, but I can solve a chunk of it.
Nice.
What do you know? I'm a 34-year-old, been doing trucking 34 years, and what's your proposal on fixing the industry?
Yeah, the trucking industry, I appreciate what you do so much, sir, because I've met with a lot of truckers, and it is a brutal, physically demanding job. You're away from your family for 4 days a week. And the majority of the truckers I met had families. And one of them said to me, it's like, well, you have to have a family to do this job because there's no other reason you would like, put yourself through that. And I also talk to truckers who tell me that the days of camaraderie are lost, that at this point they're just trying to plug you into a machine. Only 13% of truckers are unionized, 87% are mom and pop shops, and the competitive pressures are getting worse and worse. One of the things that's happening in your truck right now, they're putting in digital monitors that monitor your driving time. And the autonomous trucks, where his truck will start beeping at the 14-hour mark to say you have to get out and take a nap or go to sleep because the trucks are now digitally monitored. So we have to do a lot to help truckers. First, obviously the freedom dividend of $1,000 a month helps take the pressure off of everyone. The second big thing, though, is we need to have a trucking transition czar to come in and say, look, if we're going to save $168 billion a year in this process of automating away this job, then the truckers need a chunk of that as a transition fund to try and figure out what the next moves are. And $168 billion a year is so much that if you wanted to, and I'm not saying this would happen because it wouldn't happen, if you wanted to, you could pay every trucker their full salary and still save billions of dollars. So what you need to do is you need to take a chunk of that money and say, look, we get it. You've been trucking for how long? 34 years. 34 years. You've probably been working at a small business that haven't been that many benefits. Yeah, we essentially have to introduce like a runway off to treat you as if you were working for an organization that had a proper set of benefits as you were looking to retire. The other thing is my $1,000 a month freedom dividend. It stacks on top of Social Security. It can help us resolve the retiree crisis in this country because Social Security, it's a fixed income and it's not enough to retire on, so half of Americans at this point are never going to retire. How many of you want to live in a country where everyone's just working until the day they die? I don't. I don't want to go into a convenience store and see a 75-year-old working to try and survive. That should be a teenager making beer money, am I right?
That's right.
We can make that happen, but there's no other way to make it happen except by rewriting the rules of our economy to work for us. The great thing is if you had this $1,000 a month, then all of a sudden you would humanize the economy so much, and you can imagine the resources that would flow towards retirees, because all of a sudden, with economic resources, there'd be more in the way of caretaking, healthcare, assisted living communities, like all of it would become much more possible. Instead, we're in a country where half of Americans don't have the savings to retire, and they're just going to try and work until the day they die. That's not the country I want to live in. That's not the country I want to raise my kids in.
I'll tweet this out. Donate if you can.
All right, Manchester, one more just because I love you all. It's going to be him because he seems so enthusiastic.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. So I stream on Twitch, and I talk to a lot of progressives there, and one question they have is, I know you talked about this with Social Security, can you tell us comprehensively what the freedom dividend stacks with, and whether somebody who's made the choice to take it can exchange it out for other benefits?
So the freedom dividend stacks on top of Social Security, it stacks on top of anything healthcare related, so that's Medicare. It stacks on top of housing assistance because many of those people have been waiting literally for years and years to try and get affordable housing, and then affordable housing would consume most of the freedom dividend. The things it does not stack on top of are essentially cash and cash-like benefits. So this is SNAP, heating oil, other programs that are essentially trying to put cash in your hands to manage an expense. So when I've talked to people who are in those programs, what they say to me very often is that they live in fear of losing their benefits, is one big one. And that they have case managers and reporting requirements, and the stressor about losing their benefits, they're afraid they're not going to fill out a form right, they're afraid they're not going to file a report right, they're afraid that they're going to be caught doing something wrong. In the most extreme case, a friend's sister is on disability. She wanted to volunteer in her community, and she was told, well, she was afraid to do so because she said if she did that, then she might lose her disability benefits even if she volunteered one day. Think about that. So she was at home, she wanted to volunteer, but then she said, well, I can't volunteer because I'm afraid they'll take my check away. So that's the set of incentives we currently have, and the goal is to have the freedom dividend be universal, be opt-in, not take anything away from anyone, but for people who prefer the $1,000 cash to their current cash and cash-like benefits, they could trade one for another, and if they wanted to, they could go back if for some reason that was their preference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, I love you, Manchester.
Let's go, Andrew!
Let's go, Andrew! Thank you! I'd love to say hello, sign some books, take some selfies, and because we're in the magical land of New Hampshire, we're going to give books until we run out.
All right, selfie line. It's going to be awesome. It's going to start over here, right here, my beautiful hand right here.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed. And before we go, I want to give a huge thank you to all of our God tier patrons over on Patreon.
Yang Gang 2020. Yang Gang 2020. Yang Gang 2020. Yang Gang. Yeah. Yeah.